My first guest today co-founded Mirage Studios in 1983 with his partner Peter Laird. Together they created possibly the most iconic comic characters of the 1980s, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Welcome to the Comic Zone, Kevin.
Hey, Vincent, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm listening to all the fun that you had while we were stuck at the table signing autographs, which was great fun, obviously. Great fun to see everybody, and great fun to meet the fans and do all that. But sounds like you had a great weekend as well.
Yeah, I definitely had a good time, and it was cool to see you there at the show. I know this wasn't your first Big Apple, but I did think there was a tremendous advantage to being at this show compared to the last one because of all the snow. You were at the other one with the snow, right?
Honestly, it was genius, and unfortunately Simon had to bow out the last show because of work deadlines and that kind of thing. But I'm actually glad he did because, as you well know, we came in on Friday, started snowing sometime early Saturday, and by late Saturday, pretty much everybody could vamoosed because, we had like 8 inches of snow.
Yeah, but this show was a lot better. I mean, it rained, but still, rain is a little bit easier to get around than that huge snowstorm we had back a few months ago. So I'm glad you had a good time at the comic convention, and I would imagine it's still fun for you to meet some of the fans and hear how much your creations have inspired people.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, it's always a pleasure. I mean, honestly, it's like that's one of my favorite things. It's like we can do what we do and have a good time at doing it. We could sell one copy and have just as much fun, but to be able to actually sell and do the things that we've been able to do and find that we have a fan base, the gratitude is, from my perspective is just tenfold. The fans made me what I am, and I am forever grateful. So I'm thrilled to sit and, I can have 35 people ask me in a row, how did you create the Turtles? I'll give, the most enthusiastic answer I can and sign anything and everything they bring to the show because it's, I'm very appreciative.
That's great. Now you have, I believe you have offices in both coasts, one in Northampton and one in California?
Yeah, mainly for Heavy Metal Magazine, which is kind of my main focus right now. I have an office in Rockwell Center in New York. We used to be in the city for a long time, but we ended up moving off-site, just, saved a few pennies in city taxes and rent.
Sure.
And I have an office in Los Angeles, which is mostly the entertainment base for heavy metal, which is for, movies and that kind of stuff.
What kind of stuff do you have cooking with heavy metal right now?
Yeah.
What kind of stuff do you have cooking with heavy metal in terms of the entertainment?
Well, way too many things. And, of course, in Hollywood, it's a bit of a playground of lots of lunches, lots of, love you, babe, and let's do lunch and let's talk. But finally finding the person that's actually going to put money into a concept or series of projects you're doing is the most difficult task. And we've got numerous things. I've been working on, other heavy metal entertainment projects like heavy metal movies, heavy metal games, other heavy metal toys since we did the last heavy metal movie, which was Heavy Metal 2000, which came out in 2000. And we're getting very, very close finally after a number of years of, making a circuit to finding some things come to fruition, which we hope will materialize soon.
I can totally sympathize with you about the whole Hollywood scene. We have a production company, and my partner, Steven, and one of my employees, Ben Smith, who heads up our entertainment division, we're just out in California, and how we have meetings with everybody from Lionsgate to CBS to, Showtime and Comedy Central, and it is very difficult to get somebody to sign on the dotted line and say, let's get to work.
Well, they've trained like... lawyers always say train in billing 101. They can run up amazing amount of bills. And excuse me, as far as executives in Hollywood, I like to say they trained in giving good meeting. You can go in and have the most amazing meeting ever. I mean, most recently we had a Japanese company that was interested in doing a live-action Fistful of Blood movie. I mean, we provided besides the cast list, a budget, locations, photos of the location, the finished script, on and on and on. It was like over a 6-month period of time. It was like, yes, we love it. 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 And then when it came down to actually producing the check to fund the movie, it was like, no.
Yeah.
But that's pretty typical. We've been in that position many, many times, but we think we're in a position with many real people with real money that have real interest that hopefully you'll see some great heavy metal based material coming.
I hope so, because I know when I was a little kid and saw the first heavy metal movie, it just blew my mind away, and I'd love to see something else come out like that, or even whatever. It could be live action, it could be CGI, it could be anything, but yeah, that would be just brilliant. How long have you owned heavy metal?
It's funny. I'm actually glad you mentioned the first movie. Actually, I bought Heavy Metal magazine in 1991. It was a childhood, huge childhood inspiration. Bought the first magazine off the newsstand in 1977, and honestly, Heavy Metal led me to creators like Richard Corbin, Vaughn Bodie, Mobius. But more importantly, I would say Corbin and Bodie's, who were doing a lot of self-publishing. And I love the freedom, the control. I mean, they were the writer, the director, the editor, coordinating the printing, everything. And it sort of drove me towards the decision when I did my first comic. We didn't send, ideas to Marvel or DC or anything like that. We decided, meaning me and Peter Laird, my co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we decided we're going to self-publish and do our own thing, so we controlled and owned everything. And, Heavy Metal was a direct result on the information and the inspiration to do self-publishing. And it's funny to have the Turtles have had the success that they had as a self-publishing entity, again, something we own and control the trademark, to allow me to make the profits that I made off the Turtles to then buy Heavy Metal, which, again, inspired it in the first place. So it's kind of a...
Yeah, it's a circle, yeah.
It's a bit of a circle. And,
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Cool. I want to tell you something funny is that when you talked about the first Heavy Metal movie, which was a big inspiration, which I took... a woman I'd been trying to have a date with for about 3 months. She finally agreed to go on a date with me, and I took her to see the first Heavy Metal movie in 1981, and she never spoke to me again.
Oh,
she said, basically I learned from all of her friends, is that, he took me to a cartoon movie that had people having sex and doing drugs. That was awful. Well, which was funny. So when I bought the magazine in 1991, literally 2 days after I owned the magazine, I started making calls to Columbia TriStar, who owned the Heavy Metal movie, and executive turnover at a big company like Columbia TriStar is pretty rampant. So it took me about a week to convince Columbia TriStar and the series of executives that I spoke to that, one, they actually owned the movie, and two, that there was a fan following for it. And what had happened, a lot of people have always asked, why didn't how come it took so long for the first Heavy Metal movie to come out on videotape?
Right.
And what had happened was the music rights back in 1979, when they contracted all the artists and everything to do the movie, home video was just a bit of a fad, so they never contracted for additional rights like synchronization rights to home video, and so those rights were lost. So I'd hire my own lawyers, go in, secure all the publishing rights, the master recording rights, then go back to Columbia with a budget and say, this is what it'll cost to clear all the rights to get this movie released, which you own, and I'll cover half or most of the cost because there's a huge fan following. I made calls once a month for 2 years, which they kept saying no. And then finally, there was an article down. It was a New York Daily News, I think, one of the main New York newspapers that did not go back then. It was probably 94 of the most requested, not yet released on home video movie. Heavy Metal was number one.
Wow.
And so finally the guys at Columbia said, well, maybe you've got something here, kid. We worked with them for the next 2 years. They released Heavy Metal, the Ivan Reitman produced Heavy Metal movie in 1996. It sold 2 million copies on home video that year. It was a 10th best-selling movie of all of 1996, and it was just
amazing
treasure for not only myself but a lot of fans out there.
Oh, it's amazing. I just love that movie. I mean, just every story was great, and it was just fantastic.
It's like somebody once described it, and I honestly agree, because you look at it now, and you look after we've seen so much amazing Japanese anime, we've seen so many amazing animation movies, whether it's the Miyazaki movies or Kawajiri movie and the things that you're talking about. And somebody once told me that the first Heavy Metal movie was some of the best animation and some of the worst animation I've seen all at once.
Really?
And you think about it, there was some great sequences in there. There was some sequences in there that were just absolutely terrible. But they all work as a whole. All the little, separate short stories all strung together as loosely as they were strung together.
Yeah.
But it was what it was. Good, bad, or ugly. It is what it is, and so many people remember it fondly, like I do. It was.
Now, what directions have you tried to take the magazine in over the last? You've owned it for a dozen years, a little over a dozen years now.
Yeah, we're coming up on it's 20. We're heading into our 29th year. Honestly, when I bought the magazine, I felt that the persons that were in control of it editorially were not fans, and they weren't like, I'd been to Europe a bunch of times. I'd seen the kind of material that was coming out there as, with the new wave, the people that were inspired by, Juan Jimenez and, Mobius and Belial and all these guys. It inspired a whole group of kids over there that now were of age and doing this incredibly high quality work. And the people that were making the editorial choices were looking over this stuff, going for the older names, which isn't a bad thing. But I said, we've got to blend the old with the new and sort of move into the new generation. And so when I took over complete editorial control, I was just like, I want to put in the stuff simply that I like. And it was a lot of finger crossing, toe crossing, and praying that the material that I was choosing was something that the fans would like. And, when I bought the magazine, I was doing 4 issues a year. Now up to 9 issues a year. We're doing 6 regular bi-monthly issues, 3 specials a year. The sales increased the sales have almost doubled since when I bought it. And I'm not by any means patting myself on the back. I just feel like, I'm the biggest geek on the planet. I go to the comic store every week. I read, anything and everything, get my hands on, comic and fan. My studio looks like a toy store, comic store, backroom shelf, and I just take the stuff I like, and I've been blessed, I guess. I don't know.
No, it definitely sounds like it. I guess we both are able to make a living and design our lifestyles around something we're passionate about, which is a really unique thing not everybody gets to do.
Exactly.
I'd be grateful to.
One of the best payoffs is like all the parents and aunts and uncles and naysayers and friends and family that we've had that have said, when you told them that either you're collecting comics, buying and selling comics, or writing and drawing comics, they say that's really nice, but what are you going to actually do as a living?
Yeah.
And to actually make a living at it, and
I got that question so many times. I started getting numb to it, and just at this point, people kind of understand that I'm pretty successful at what I do, and if anybody knows me, they pretty much know the whole story. I mean, I used to sell comic books in the streets of Manhattan when I first got out of college, and built myself up from there. So yeah, in the same way, you and Peter started off with Mirage Studios, and look where you are today. It's the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people that have read and know anything about the history of the Turtles. I mean, basically Mirage Studios. The name Mirage came from obviously that the studio was a mirage. It was actually a living room of an apartment that myself and Peter and his wife, we shared an apartment together in Dover, New Hampshire, and our living room was the actual studio. So it wasn't really a studio. It was just funny. It was the biggest joke to us. It's like, well, Mirage Studios. Yes, well, it's not a studio. It's our living room.
Let's talk a little bit about the Turtles. I know you probably had this question a million times, and you even mentioned it early in our first segment. How did you guys come up with the Turtles?
Honestly, it was pure and simple. It was just a complete and utter joke. Both Peter and I were sharing a studio. I mean, I had strengths in, a certain style of drawing and painting. He had strengths in other kinds of drawings. We sort of merged our styles together, and we were trying to sell our work, whether it's editorial cartoons and Dungeons and Dragons or that kind of stuff. And late one night in the studio, I literally did this drawing. I said, what would be the goofiest fucking thing you would ever see as a martial artist? And so I said, you imagine Bruce Lee as a turtle. And, of course, it made Peter laugh, so that was my inspiration to then I did this first drawing of a turtle kind of standing upright. He had a mask on. He had nunchucks. Michelangelo was the first turtle I drew. And he's in this, Bruce Lee kind of pose. And, of course, it was a one-upmanship in the studio, so Pete did a drawing to kind of top my drawing. And, of course, I had to do a drawing to top his. So I did this pose of all 4 turtles kind of standing together, this dramatic, Marvel-style cover, we're coming at you pose. And I did this banner title called Ninja Turtles in pencil, and when Pete inked it, he added the Teenage Mutant part of the Ninja Turtles and then did the whole ink drawing of it. And we just, pretty much pissed ourselves as far as like, this is the most ludicrous thing we've ever seen. And then the next day, we sort of got up when we were in the studio kind of goofing around, and we said, because we don't have that much distracting paying work going on, we said we should actually tell a story about how these characters came to be and self-publish our own work, like, the people that inspired us, like Corbin and Bodie and those kinds of characters. And so that's what we did. We ended up writing and drawing a 40-page comic inspired by, some Frank Miller, mostly Frank Miller. Frank Miller's Ronin, Frank Miller's Daredevil, little Chris Claremont. We sort of pulled a little bit of Cerebus. When Cerebus first started, he was inspired by Barry Smith, doing this little aardvark drawn like Barry Smith, Conan the Barbarian. And we sort of combined our favorite things, whether it was New Mutants and Daredevil and Cerebus and animal characters and whatever, ninjas and Bruce Lee and, David Carradine Kung Fu, and pretty much came up with something that we pretty much ripped off from everywhere we could.
It's funny. I remember it must have been when I was around 15, 16 years old. My brother Jerry, my older brother, I have two older brothers, and they turned me on to comic books when I was a little kid. And my brother Jerry for Christmas got me the first compiled color graphic novel of the Turtles. And I had been out of collecting for a little bit. I had discovered women, and I guess I had put comic books away for a little bit. And I couldn't stop reading. I thought it was fantastic. Now, was there one particular turtle that is a personal favorite or favorite to draw?
Well, it's like, actually each of the Turtles, and probably like a lot of writers that, different characters within whatever they create are inspired by different people that they really know. In like, for example, the April character was inspired by somebody I knew in high school. Casey Jones was inspired by somebody else I knew. Within Turtles, Peter was kind of the geeky computer gadget. He always had like a watch that had a calculator on stuff. So he's sort of like more like the Donatello character. And I was more like Raphael, which is like, when we'd have these story meetings, so basically what we'd do is how it would work together is like, we'd sit down in a room in the studio and basically talk out the story idea, would hand write out the entire story, then I'd do the layouts. And I would always be the one that would be jumping out of the room and be excited, and, if Peter went off on some weird tangent, I'd be, I'd go off on him or something, not, in a bad way. And so I was closest to Raphael. And, in fact, so Raphael, which is kind of the hothead, the one that's always causing arguments and causing problems within the group. And some of my favorite stories that I've ever done are these short stories with Casey and Raphael together. And actually my final Turtle story was done, it's called a story called Body Count, which is a 100-page graphic novel I did with Simon Bisley. And it was it's kind of a funny story. In short, Simon was over visiting me here in the studio like he is here today. And he'd never seen a John Woo movie, and we're talking, years and years ago. And so I put in like Bullet in the Head and Killer and all that stuff, and he's watching these amazing gunfights and all the stuff that John was doing in his Hong Kong days. Hard-boiled, my goodness. And Simon goes, we should do the longest-running gunfight in comics. And I said, that is a genius idea. So we decided to do Casey and Raphael in a story called Body Count, and it was, as far as we're concerned, the longest-running gunfight in comics.
Sure, that's true.
Yeah, we had a blast doing it. I think Wizard magazine actually gave it, some magazine gave it, as far as a review, it was called the highest flying eyeball count of any comic ever done, which meant basically when I first started doing it, I drew the action, especially whether it was somebody getting maimed or hurt or whatever. I always drew things off camera because I felt it gave a... you can imagine the rest. And Simon was like, no, we're going to put it right up front. So fucking everything. So every time somebody's getting shot and there's bullets and brains flying everywhere, and there's always an eyeball flying across the panel. And I think there was like, he's over here laughing. And then there was like, probably 50 or 60 eyeballs flying across panels and different scenes of the thing. And it was just,
how do you guys come up with the names of the Turtles? Obviously they're all fantastic Renaissance painters and sculptors and Renaissance men. But how come guys like Giotto? How come there's no turtle named Giotto?
Honestly, it was when I was, for the whole 6 months that I was in art school, which you can probably tell by my drawing skills. But the whole time I was in high school and art school and that kind of stuff, art history and history in general was one of my favorite things to study, and especially the Renaissance period. Was one of my favorite periods.
Mine also.
And that kind of stuff. And so when we actually sat down, we were trying to come up with names for these turtles. We said, well, they're coming up with the origin, he said, well, if you're working in an environment as absurd as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you don't want to go with traditional, say, Asian names, respective names. What would be the next funniest step? Well, you call them Doug, Bob, Steve, and Reggie. And no, that's not silly enough. And said, well, I love art history. Pete loved art history, so we said, let's take it to an extreme, and we both loved the Renaissance period. So he said, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. That's Simon using the air horn. And then the hardest one was actually coming up with the last one, because Donatello was a sculptor, and actually, like, Bernini was a sculptor, which was later than Michelangelo and Raphael and Michelangelo. And so we ended up with Donatello because it was in the same period, so that was, like, kind of funny, and it just fit an absurd.
You got a lot of people copying. There was black belt hamsters. You guys kind of created this, inspired this huge anthropomorphic comic book, black and white comic book craze. How did you feel about those copycats?
Honestly, it's like for years and years after that, they literally, a lot of collectors, a lot of people blame the Turtles and Peter and I for what they call the black and white boom and bust, which, as you know, as a collector, happened much later, a little bit later with the, when they were selling 7 million copies of the Death of Superman, that kind of thing. But when we came out with the Turtles, what happened was, we had, $500 from an income tax return that I had. We had $200 from Peter's bank account. I borrowed $1,000 from an uncle. We printed 3,000 copies. Now, when it came out, within a very short period of time, it went from, a $1.50 comic to a $25 collectible item.
Right.
And then when the collector's market kind of drove it through the roof, we had all these people come on with, what we call imitation is the best form of flattery, quote unquote, which, for us, we copied Ronin, we copied Daredevil, we copied a lot of people to do what we did, much like Dave Sim. And so when people copied us, it was kind of flattery, but at some point, we had like Miley, Michael Ray, prepubescent gophers, gangrene something gophers, and kangaroo. And even Marvel at one time was doing adult thermonuclear samurai elephants, which I think they never actually materialized. But unfortunately, what it caused was anybody that put out a black and white comic with an adjective, noun title was selling between 50 and 60,000 copies. And the collectors are buying it thinking it's going to be worth, $50, $60, $100, a couple months later, and unfortunately it didn't. And it caused a real, downfall in the market and caused a lot of problems. A lot of independent distributors at that time went out of business.
And that's how the black and white market got busted, basically.
Yeah, basically busted. And, again, same thing happened when, I remember talking to John Nee at Image Comics, part of the Image, the Wildstorm group, and there was a time when, the whole Image guys were producing all the things that they were producing, is that he wouldn't print a comic. They wouldn't print a comic as a company if the sales orders were less than 1 million copies. And, these days, it's like Heavy Metal sells about 150,000 plus copies. Some of the best-selling comics sell about that amount. And, I think we're grateful for those. I think there's independent publishers out there that if they can sell 5,000 or 6,000 copies and basically cover the cost of actually doing the comic, they're just absolutely thrilled, and much respect to them for taking that chance at this.
Yeah, it's a totally different world out there right now. Now, you've had tons and tons of artists working on the Turtles over the years. Which one do you think best captures the essence of what you were trying to get across in your original run on the Turtles?
It's difficult because there were so many, one of the things that we liked about when we had a lot of different artists work on the Turtles is that we really gave them a lot of freedom because, a lot of people don't realize that Peter and I only did like 22, 23 issues together. We did the first, 11 regular issues. We did 1-issue micro series, 3 issues returned to New York, and 1 issue 50 and wrote a bunch more. But then we did work with other artists. But we sort of like used that as a basis of the Turtle universe and let any artist that came in sort of read the material, kind of the do's and don'ts, and let them have their own way and see what they discovered, which is really great. My personal favorite, all-time favorite, besides working with Peter Laird, is that, with the body count issue, they worked on Simon because, basically I discussed the whole story with Simon, worked with Simon the way I did with, Peter Laird, as we kind of talked out the whole story. I pretty much laid it out, did all the basic breakdowns, and then Simon finished it. And then the joy of seeing one of my quote-unquote crude drawings turned into a Simon Bisley drawing, and the character that he would bring to life within it was just pretty
inspiring.
Yeah, very inspiring.
Now, I remember, obviously, there were several Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. I want to touch on one aspect of it. How just explain to the audience out there so they don't think you're responsible for it directly. How the hell did Vanilla Ice get into the second, I think it was the second Turtle movie?
Yeah. Essentially, what happened was, it's like we did the, when Turtles started selling, by Turtles, I think 8 or 9, we were selling well over 100,000 copies, which inspired Hollywood to come knocking on our door, which we ignored for the most part early on until we found the right people that we felt that would allow us the creative freedom that we wanted. We basically wanted script approval, treatment approval, script approval, character approval, numerous other approvals. And finally, between a company called Golden Harvest, which had done a lot of the early Jackie Chan movies, and New Line Cinema, who was the distributor that allowed us to have those protections, we moved ahead with that, and some of the initial writer-directors that they sort of presented us with as people that sort of encapsulate and capture the Turtles concept were appalling. Fortunately, a director named Steve Barron came on board. He's a British guy that worked with Jim Henson and that kind of thing, and he was not only a fan of the material from early on, really wanted to capture the original feeling that was inspired by the Turtles early comics, and he basically took Turtles 1, parts of 2, 11, and 12, and sort of rolled them into a whole, that was the whole first movie, and then we worked with them sort of, a very tight-knit sort of...
And then how did this all sounds like it's positive stuff, and then how did Vanilla Ice get involved? Yeah, that sounded great.
I'm going to hang up now. And then what happened was, so obviously the first movie came out, it was produced for like $8 million, did like $135 million domestic alone, and went on to do some ludicrous things that we just could not believe. And of course, all the Hollywood guys were jumping all over us to do the second movie. But because of some reviews that had been done of the early movies that said, there was a lot of violence and this stuff, the studio wanted to fix that stuff, and we're like, no, it's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. The early Bugs Bunny cartoons, we had, stuff for adults and you had stuff for kids. You have to write the story that pleases all audiences. And they said, yeah, sure, kids. And so we worked on what we thought was a great screenplay for the second movie. And then they brought this director on called Michael Pressman, who, if you read the screenplay for the second movie and saw the movie, you'd be going, what the fuck happened? And, we were on set when they basically had brought in Vanilla Ice, and we're going like, pitching a fit. Where did this come from? And they say, and so on and so on. And that's the way Hollywood works, and which is, the second movie did obviously much, much, much less profit than the first movie did. And then Peter and I sort of really beat the studio up and we had a lot more demands and things like that. What we needed to do to accomplish what we wanted to see in the third movie, which I would say the first movie being the best, the second movie being the worst, the third movie was kind of in the middle.
Okay.
Sort of had a compromise.
And now I hear that they're coming out with a new CGI movie based on the Turtles. Now, you still own the Turtles, you and Peter?
Basically, yes. Both Peter and I still own the Turtles. Peter has full creative control over the Turtles and has been doing an amazing job. Basically, at a point when the Turtles, their start being 1988, their peak being 90, 91, they kind of trailed off slowly through the 90s to, I think 97 was the last series that we did for Saban, which is a live-action series. That was kind of the valley, if you will. And it took a bit of a rest. And when I think around the time when Spider-Man came out and Scooby-Doo came out and these things started, Hollywood started having this nostalgia effect that they all started saying, what else is out there? And so, it came back around to say, well, I think the Turtles was fun when it was, and let's see if we can do something, a new animated series and new stuff and see if the kid market for that kind of stuff is still out there. And by then I'd moved on to, saying, look, I want to focus more on heavy metal projects and less on Turtle stuff. And Pete said, well, I'll handle all the creative stuff on the Turtles. You do your heavy metal stuff, and I'll still send you checks when checks are appropriate. Well, so that's what we kind of worked out. And, kudos to Pete for doing a great job at revitalizing the new animated series.
The animated series on TV. One of my friends is an artist on that, and it's fantastic. I think it's really impressive that they do all the design work here in the States. I know the production is done over in I think Korea, but just really brilliant stuff. Especially this past season that I saw, just some of the fight scenes were spectacular.
Oh, it's great. They actually, kudos to 4Kids Entertainment out of New York City, which they do a lot of design work and stuff out of the city, and they worked with a company called Dongwoo in Korea, which is just, they do Teen Titans as well as they did the He-Man series, which I think was wonderfully animated but short-lived. And they were actually, Dongwoo came in as a financial partner as well as, a creative partner. And, everybody agreed early on that would take it to as darker side as they could. And, honestly, it's like when you see so many kids' projects, concepts sort of come and go. And at the end of the day, what really matters is you can come up with what you think is the most ingenious idea, the most kid-friendly, the most this, but it doesn't matter a hill of beans until you get to the kids. If the kids buy it, they buy it, and you're done.
Right. Kevin, I hear the music coming up, which means this is the end of our conversation today, and I want to thank you so very much for joining me. It really was great. I think we could probably do another 2 hours, you and I, back and forth about comics and how they've had such a great effect on our lives.